Okay, Councillor Fairhurst, we're live.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen?
Brilliant, thank you very much. So, as the title suggests, this report is around the Afghan relocation support programme. The purpose of this report is looking for approval for the Director of Adults Health and Care to authorise and manage all payments in relation to the Afghan relocation policy assistance programme and to help enable swift delivery of support to families by Hampshire County Council and our district and borough council partners. There are two recommendations on the table. As I've just said, the first one is to the executive member for Adult Services and Public Health delegate the authority to the Director of Adult Health and Care to agree the terms and enter into an Afghan relocation assistance policy funding instructions with the Home Office, and also to delegate authority to the Director for Adult Health and Care to approve all payments in relation to this programme, including by way of grant, as outlined in the report and in line with any funding instructions received by the Home Office. So in terms of the sort of contextual information, as many of you would have seen in the news recently, following the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, the UK has also made a similar decision and is withdrawing all troops from the area between June and September 2021. As a result of that decision, there are a number of families that are now at potential risk of being targeted. And these are the families that have been working with UK troops, for example, as translators, working in local offices, as local guides and connectors, and those sorts of roles. The estimate is that there's going to be about 600 families nationally, and that Hampshire would look to potentially support around 18 to 22 families in that region, depending on the number of properties and the amount of support we're able to put in place. So the Afghan locally employed staff Afghan LES program has been running since about 2013, and the Afghan Relocation Assistance Policy, or ARAP, is an extension of that, which was launched in April, specifically to deal with this particular set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. Anyone coming in via this programme will be issued with exceptional leave to remain upon arrival. So Hampshire County Council, we're working with all of our district and borough councils, as well as other organisations, to help develop a programme to help support these families. However, at this time of writing, we have not yet sort of entered into and agreed a funding agreement with Home Office. Therefore, we're working on a sort of an in principle basis at this moment in time, until such time as the formal agreements are all in place. We'll not be in a position to make any payments until such time as that funding instruction has been agreed. Therefore, at this time, there isn't a sort of full funding envelope as such. However, as we do understand it, the funding will be organised in sort of in three areas. And that's allocated on a per family basis. Once we have that funding instruction in place, we'll be able to formally start to match families to properties identified by our district partners and agree start dates. A proportion of that funding is made available to cover housing and daily living costs until such time as families are able to apply for and successfully get benefits or are able to find suitable employment. It is proposed that that element of the funding will be passed through to our district and borough council partners to manage. And the arrangement is designed to create sort of a consistent approach across the whole of Hampshire to ensure we're able to have a consistent process for the whole area, but also make sure that there's ability to have that sort of local flexibility to respond to local variations. It is also proposed that our existing support, the provider that's currently providing assistance for the UKRS refugee programme, Two Saints, will look to extend their provision to include families into this programme. Support delivered is identical in many ways to that delivered under that programme, and the systems and processes needed to accept and assess support families are already in place. The proposed arrangements don't represent an additional cost pressure necessarily to extend, as we say, to the funding is on a per family basis. However, it must be stressed at this time that no family will be matched until such time as the funding instruction between the Home Office and Hampshire County Council have been agreed. In terms of equalities impact assessment, the assessment came back as is considered to be neutral. It does not consider that there would be a negative impact of any protected characteristics. However, it must, again, as said, must be stressed that at this time we don't know the full profile of the characteristics of the family coming in until they are matched. So this will be something that will be continually monitored. It's also just worth quickly noting that the approval will be sought from Hampshire Head of Legal for the modification of the existing contract with the support provider, and for the required extension for this provision, rather than this extension for this provision, rather than this coming through here. Two recommendations on the table. One is for delegated authority to be granted to the Director of Adults Health and Care in terms of to enter into any funding instructions of the Home Office, and the second is to delegate authority to the Director of Adults Health and Care to approve all payments in relation to the Afghan relocation programme, including by way of grant, as outlined in the report. I will open up for any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. If I could just turn to Graham, because I'm delegating him the power to negotiate with the Home Office. Are we doing this in concert with other authorities?
Yeah, so there's a huge amount of work that Stephen and colleagues do regionally. So there are regional leads and representatives who provide the conduit for us back up to the Home Office and the wider resettlement programme. So the funding agreement that we're waiting on, and it's the funding agreement that we're waiting on, which is the main issue for us at the moment. It won't be so much a case of negotiating in terms of the money. The money will come almost as a one size fits all. So as Stephen says, there's an allowance per family unit, which breaks down into 3 different areas in terms of housing, support costs, and also resettlement costs, if I can broadly characterise them in that way. And it's on a per family basis. It's in line with other resettlement programs. My disappointment, and it is a disappointment, is that there's a difference currently in terms of this program and other existing programs. So we have the Syrian refugee settlement program, which comes with, I think it's 5 years worth or up to 5 years worth of resettlement funding per family. Here we're looking at a maximum of 12 months. Now, you know, even with good grace and a fair wind, it's going to be challenging to resettle some of these families within that period. Yeah. So in terms of that funding agreement, we will continue alongside other councils in the South East, but moreover nationally, in terms of lobbying through those regional leads back into the Home Office. And indeed, I'm sure we'll be having some direct conversations as well in terms of what's required in order to properly support and settle these families over what may be a slightly longer term than 12 months. But we are waiting. I'm hoping sooner rather than later that funding agreement will be received. We are able to sign it, and then we can crack on with resettling families into the available properties that we've got.
Well, absolutely. Otherwise, you know, they're stuck in their hotel and nowhere to go.
Precisely, precisely.
Until we can get them into homes where they can start the process. Okay. Councillor Carpenter.
Yes, thank you very much. Graham's partly answered my question, but we'll be passing on this money to districts and boroughs for the housing aspects. And I just wonder whether Hampshire will have an ongoing need to monitor the welfare of the families, that help children into schools, and you know, until the families become more independent. You've just said that we're only going to get 1 year's worth of money, but that's for the housing. And I just wondered, you know, how will Hampshire be supported to support these families, because they may come with disabilities in the family or elderly people. Yeah, just curious about that aspect, really.
So if I can start off, and then I'm sure Stephen will add detail that inevitably I miss out, but I'll try and keep it relatively high level. So what we've established is a program board and a project team that are looking at all aspects of what resettlement looks like. So Councillor Carpenter, you're absolutely right in terms of getting children into school, getting adults into potentially English classes, but also employment, settling in local communities. So we've got a project board and a program team to pick up all of those elements. So whilst this is a program hosted within Adults Health and Care, working principally and primarily with district and borough councils because of housing, and with our support provider, Two Saints, there are representatives drawn across the whole of the Hampshire County Council family of services, to mean that we've got leads and liaison into schools, that we've got all of those links that you would want us to have. They're already established, they're up and running, ready to go. So we've looked at this as a fully resolved programme, much based on what we've done before with Syrian refugees and so on and so forth. Although we're talking about different communities, many of the features that need to be in place are the same. And we have a proven track record in terms of resettlement of other families over a period of time. This is slightly different because we're talking about Afghani families rather than Syrian families, but the same principles apply. And all of those networks, all of those connections, all of that support is already established and in place.
Yes, I just hope that the funding for that will follow or
so
in the package.
So do I, hence my comment about those conversations continuing with regional leads, but also I believe on occasion it will be direct with the Home Office. I would also say that the leader has also written to the relevant Home Office Minister, both to express Hampshire County Council support in this resettlement programme, but also to make that very point around continued and available funding.
Yeah, and I would say if this programme is as successful as the Syrian programme, where I think the families settled very well and very quickly, we will be doing the right thing by these families. Right, Councillor Withers.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, Graham's given a very thorough brief, and obviously what Fran just talked about, the resettlement process, not only through our organisation, but also the social services and everything. And of course, Prevent, to ensure that these families who will probably have to change names and everything else are put into secure districts, boroughs. And do we actually know approximately how many boroughs we're talking about at the moment?
So as at the moment, all 11 of the Hampshire districts and boroughs are involved. They've all come forward and said that they are willing to find properties. There are a number that we're working with, perhaps more closely than others, because they've got there's a couple that have got a number of properties that they're working with the MOD that they may have been able to identify that might be able to bring forward sooner. But it would be all of across the whole of Hampshire at the moment. In terms of any sort of further detail in terms of the exact locations, then we're working to pull that together in terms of a spreadsheet and a bit of a more detailed map. But it's all areas at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Rushmore's got a large Nepalese element of residents, like some of the other district and boroughs. And of course, we've also got the Minister for Veterans. And I think there's an avenue there which we might pursue as well.
Thank you. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. We had quite a good briefing with Graham the other day, and I'm really happy with the programme that we're putting in place. I think my main concern is what happens if we don't get funding after the first year? Does that put the pressure on us or the boroughs or all of us?
So that is absolutely the key point in terms of, and I'm in danger of repeating myself. It's the ongoing conversations that we're having in terms of, I'm unable to understand why for the Syrian programme we have 5 years worth of resettlement funding, and currently for this it's 1 year. But I would also say that initially it was 4 months of funding was announced. There was then an awful lot of pushback. It's now been extended to 12 months. So I remain optimistic, but clearly we go into this needing to have that funding agreement, something that we are technically comfortable with in terms of being able to properly and appropriately support the families and make sure that none of the public authorities or indeed our providers are exposed to unnecessary risk. So it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Sort of what worries me, some of the men, if they've been interpreters, are going to speak English. But for the women who lead a more sheltered life in their country and the children, it's going to be a huge learning curve for them. And I think the 5 years that we were given with the Syrians is the right thing to do. So thank you, Graham. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Councillor Tuston, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Fairhurst. No, I think Councillor Briggs has pretty much covered my concerns. It's obviously there is the potential pressures after 12 months on boroughs and Hampshire, but my concern is more about what will happen to these people after 12 months if the funding dries up and then they, I don't want them falling off a cliff edge. That's obviously a huge concern, and then left isolated in communities. So that's my main thing. But I think really that's already been covered. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Very happy to approve the recommendations, and I do hope that we get the families sooner rather than later and start their integration into Hampshire. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Kevin, do you want to stop